say, is one of the few places on Earth that survived the last ice age, and therefore that is the reason it has such incredible, biodiversity. Over a quarter of the world's species are in this little part of...
It's super ancient. For those that don't know, the Ice Age hasn't run over it, killing whatever was originally there or displacing it. This is one of the most ancient places on Earth where you have a continually developing system, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And of course, it barely has survived now the last 40 years of oil production because of the way in which it was done. Texaco discovered oil, came in, they set up a consortium with the government. The government is not blameless in this situation, but Texaco was, created and operated this system that, as the plaintiffs say, was designed to pollute. Basically, there were 3 levels of pollution down there. The first and most insidious level of pollution is that when the crude oil comes up from the ground, where it's been, hanging out beneath the Earth's surface for millions of years, it's mixed with water. That water is called formation water because it's been mixed in with the crude for, eons. There's a process of separation where the marketable crude is separated out from the water. The marketable crude goes by pipeline to a port and is sent off so that we can go get it refined and have lots of gasoline in this country. The water is supposed to be the standard operating practice of the day, although Chevron will claim otherwise. The standard operating practice of the day is to re-inject that water into dormant wells so that it goes back into the earth out of the, way below the water table. That's an expensive process, relatively speaking. So the plaintiffs...
here in Texas, a lot of oil industry, if any of that gets into the water table, it's a huge lawsuit, huge event.
Absolutely. If this stuff happened in the United States, these people would be in jail, is my opinion. Chevron disputes that and claims otherwise. One of the problems with this case is that the court has been overwhelmed with paper and disinformation and misinformation and counterclaims. Your head will spin.
Well, like you said, you're not a petroleum geologist.
Yeah.
I'm not a chemist.
Yeah.
But watching the film, we've been playing clips of it here in the background, you're by a river and you see the oil and the gasoline, the shininess where the people are bathing and drinking. It's coming by. You see the black oil pouring out into the water. You see, that they clearly...
Yeah. Yeah, so let me just so the listeners understand. So the oil, the water and the oil are separated in this separation process. Oil goes off to market. The water is supposed to be re-injected into these wells. Instead, it was literally pumped into the rivers and streams that feed the Amazon River that are also the home to, it used to be 6 indigenous tribes, now it's 5 indigenous tribes. And these people just drink the water and didn't know better. And in fact, we heard stories, I can't verify it, so it was not included in the film, but we heard stories that actually the early oil development people actually told the locals that formation water was, had vitamins and minerals and was good for you. These people didn't know better. They trusted they had never had contact with white people until about 40 years ago. And again, I just want to say...
Well, hell, they tell us that sodium fluoride, that's a catch-all for hundreds of chemicals. We've got a tour of the Austin facility. It's hundreds of chemicals they put from the byproduct of fertilizer manufacturing in our water, so they tell us it's minerals.
That's true. So one level of pollution was just the direct piping for 3 decades of formation water. The other level of pollution is that they carved out of the jungle unlined, and they will claim it's lined because the jungle clay is not permeable. We saw evidence to the contrary. They carved these giant unlined pits. When a well is first dug, the initial stuff that comes up is just kind of a toxic soup of stuff that gets dumped into these pits. And then whenever they do maintenance on the wells, more stuff gets dumped into these pits. And these pits are, it's not unusual to have pits, but they're supposed to be cleaned up. And these pits were just left in the jungle. And what was a little unusual in the jungle version of these pits is that because it rains so much in the Amazon rainforest, that's why it's called the rainforest, these pits would overflow from rain. So they installed these gooseneck pipes that allowed the rainwater, which then had been mixing with the petroleum, to leach into the to go right into the rivers and streams. And then the third level of pollution, which is not their fault, but because this is standard in oil production, that's one of the reasons oil production is just a messy business. The other byproduct of oil production is natural gas that is not brought to market often in these kinds of regions where it's difficult to bring it to market. They just burn it off. That's why at oil production facilities you see a flare going off. So imagine in the jungle thousands of these flares adding to a black rain environment to an already assaulted environment that was once pristine. I mean, it breaks your heart walking around these villages. You know, these Amazonian Indians who, had a very nice lifestyle, in harmony with nature for millennia. We force these people into a quasi-Western lifestyle by virtue of the fact that we take away their traditional means of sustenance. The animal stocks are depleted from the pollution. The fish in the river are dead.
Well, I think that's the key here, is that you're saying they know now. Because if people are putting an act on, they would, still eat the fish, but you're saying they won't eat the fish now.
Well, they have to. That's the sad thing, is these people, looking into mothers' eyes, knowing that they're giving their children poisonous water because there's no other water. Nobody has come to the aid of these people. Whatever fish they can get, they eat it. But
so it's a primitive area with no infrastructure, and they're just drinking the water right out of the streams and rivers that are just a mile or less away from all these toxic chemicals being dumped. I mean, I know enough about the oil industry, just growing up in and around it here in Texas, that they're not following any of the same procedures or rules in Ecuador. Just looking what's on the video, this is just outrageous.
Yeah, well, Chevron claims that they were following the standards of the day and that they cleaned up their mess, and that any mess is due to the fact that they turned over the operation to the state-run oil company called Petroecuador. And it is true that Petroecuador, because, Texaco left in 92. They didn't get a renewal of their concession from the government. They split. They turned this polluting system over to the state-run oil company called Petroecuador. And one of the complicating factors of the case, and one of Chevron's, legal points, is that Petroecuador continued to pollute for a number of, until today. They've gotten their act cleaned up a little bit. So Chevron points the finger at Petroecuador, but, that is kind of obfuscating the original issue, which is in 93, this lawsuit was originally filed in the United States shortly after their departure because everyone saw that there was a polluted mess there.
Well, I want to be clear. On the show, I exposed the whole greenhouse gas tax system written up by Enron is clearly a fraud. But then people get confused and say, well, wait, you're not for the environment. No, I don't want my children drinking toxic waste in the water, breathing poisons in the air, eating GMO foods. And the evidence is all of that is bad and hurting all of us. And this is something clearly in the film and the stories that we see around the world where if we demand change, we will get it. And it looks like that the pressure you and others have put on them is starting to have some effect now that the state-owned oil monopoly is starting to clean up its act. Because, it goes back to The Jungle, the book written over 100 years ago about people falling into the sausage machines and the coal plants not having scrubbers and, all the toxic waste here. There is good things about environmentalism we've done that we need to do and continue to do. The problem is you have all these opportunists and NGOs coupling their agenda of just getting control of the economy to this. So it's kind of like getting the mafia for help, and you end up with something even worse. So it's a very sophisticated situation from my point of view. But, Joe, I know that you have been offered top documentaries, TV shows, and you have done a lot of those. And I know traveling down there 25 times and spending year after year, several years on this film that I know you're just hoping to even get your investment back, is a great social investment you've made, and I really respect you for what you've done. because this is a film that most people wouldn't have the courage on multiple fronts, being down there in that hellhole and also dealing with the oil companies. So I really do commend your courage.
Thank you. I went down on this initial scouting mission, and I just was embarrassed to be an American. If it were true that in an American company, whether it was legal or not, whether they've protected themselves through legal, releases as they claim and all sorts of whatever, things that are beyond my training.
Chicanery.
Legal or not, to me, what has been done in this region, I feel is morally bankrupt. And when I went back to my nice home in New York and tucked my two children in their separate bedrooms and turned on my tap and had a drink of relatively clean water, I just felt like, how could I turn my back on these people who have been screwed over by the system in ways that people can't even believe unless you go down there and look at the place.